Baby, CreepTime the podcast is going on tour and coming to a city near you.
So head over to creeptime.com to get your tickets to come see CreepTime live.
Well, you can't trust County.
This research. Welcome back, Stu.
Oh my goodness. But I'm like, nothing's really changed. I'm still in the same darn room in my parents' house. It's like
you mean
60
that
degrees.
Beautiful sunroom that you're in?
I
I
know.
came on and I was like, oh, you have a backdrop, a green screen backdrop, and I'm sitting here in solitary confinement. It looks amazing. It looks
One
beautiful.
window. Oh my God. Yeah, I gotta say that I really wish my sunroom in my apartment was like this, where the light just came beaming in like this. It's usually just that one stream that's like the heavens behind my head.
Of course, I know that the woes of the sunroom in the apartment. I completely understand the trials and tribulations. I'm kidding. Well, hi everybody. Although we are filming from afar still, we are still with our family homes. This is the aftermath of Thanksgiving, and it is a stellar time to be alive. We are both 35 pounds heavier than when we came in. So
truly, I could tell this morning. I was like, oh girl, the stuffing was stuffed.
Night one of like coming back, I was like, this is a weekend of sweatpants for me, unfortunately.
1,000%.
Also, we have to acknowledge the size of this coffee that I was telling you about. Big as my head. Big as my head, girl.
But Duncan, that's how I know you're back in New England.
Absolutely. I was like, this is the only time where I'm like riding hard daily for Duncan.
Yeah.
To pull up to the window and to be like, do you have something larger than a large? That's actually what I said to them. And she goes, we do have an extra large. And I said, that's what I'm going to need.
That's what we need.
I'm going to
11
need that.
equals.
But for today's case, I sort of sat with this for a minute. I talked to you about this kind of loosely before we jumped on, but I really wanted to lean into something that was kind of piquing my interest at the moment. And I had heard of this story a while back on a few different podcasts, but when I decided to do a deep dive and really like sink my teeth into it last night, I was shocked by how little information and photo evidence there was on this story. And I have my theories in part about why that was, but I wanted to kind of scrap together all of the information I could for today so I could bring it to you and the creepers. Have you ever heard of the name of Cherita Thomas?
Cherita Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
It does sound kind of familiar for some odd reason.
I might have mentioned it to you in the past. It's possible.
Okay.
Because I heard this like years ago.
Cherita Thomas. I don't know why it sounds familiar on my ear, but
it is an 80s case, so it's not terribly long ago. And I know that we've like looked at a lot of 70s and 80s cases, so maybe that's where you kind of saw it in passing.
Yeah.
It's possible.
I'm not sure.
But if I could give you just a quick top line for you and the creepers. Hot babies. The scene is sort of set in like a dark evening, right? The year is 1980, and we're going to be along U.S. Route 23. This is out in Michigan, for any of the Michigan creepers who are listening. Now, Cherita was only 21 years old at the time, and she was all alone. She was returning back from, it was a baseball game, and then she stopped at a tavern with a friend. She was going to be returning back home, where her 4-year-old daughter was being babysat. The car stalled on the side of the road, and she was stranded out in the darkness. This is the worst case scenario, and I know that you and I have looked at other cases that are similar, but this is especially bad, and I will get into that in a minute as to why it was so harrowing for her. From the skimpy witness statements that I could find that could string this together, the story is that while on this road, this was one of the last times that she was ever really seen or interacted with. There is one other witness statement that would come in after the fact, but again, it's difficult to say what really went down. But officially, on this August night, this would be the last time that Cherita Thomas has ever been seen. So today, I want to uncover the timeline that I could put together for this so that you and I can kind of look at this and approach this as investigators and really try to figure out what might have happened to her, and is the suspected culprit really the person we should be looking at. Just initial thoughts on the setup of that story. I will give further context and details about who Cherita was, what this night was like, but just that thought alone of being a woman in the 80s, alone, stranded on the side of a dark road in rural Michigan.
for some reason, the first thing that popped into my mind was Julia Davis. Like, so
Mhm.
I'm just immediately getting weird imagery of like being stranded on a highway. I don't know if that's where this is going to go, but the idea of being on like a back road by myself, stranded in the middle of the night. I don't know if that's when this was, but
It was in the dark of the evening. Very late, actually. I think until I think it was past midnight. It might have been.
And you said she was going back. Her daughter was at home. So she was going back home.
There's a little bit more to the story, which I will unpack in the timeline for the creepers and you, but she technically was out with a friend that night, and both her daughter and this friend's 2 children were all with the same babysitter. So the plan was she was going to drive back to, I believe, the friend's home so she could pick up her daughter. And then it was her friend's car that she was driving. There's a lot to get into with this, but
Yeah.
this was a terrible situation because the car stalls. The car breaks down on the side of the road. She has really no way to communicate. And we would learn for other reasons why she doesn't want to get out on foot in this town.
Oh, God.
So before I'm going to get into any of the rest of this, just a quick welcome back to all of the creepers who are listening. Hi, everybody. I hope your Thanksgivings were fabulous.
Hi, babies. Hope y'all are wearing sweatpants as well.
And I know they are. And I know they are.
I know they are.
I'm 2 minutes away from wearing a skirt, to be honest. Like, I need to be that free.
A kilt.
Preferably. But you guys know the drills by now. Welcome back. Of course, we love when you share and support the show for all that you do by following, subscribing to the show, whenever you leave a positive rating or you hit the bell notification. All of that really, really does help to support the show, grow the show, and get these stories out to more people. And I am going to shout out to many of the creepers that have reached out over the holiday and have kind of thanked us for sort of being around for the holiday season, because I know you have long drives, you have plane rides. A lot of creepers introduced us to their families in car rides, which is wild to think about, that we were a part. There was somebody reached out who was like, you guided us for a 15-hour cross-country car ride for Thanksgiving. All we did was listen to Creep Time, and I was like, grateful.
And you ended up in another country.
I was like, and when did the car go off the cliff? Exactly. When
did we go barreling down the highway? Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah, that's so special.
But we are really appreciative of it. So thank you so much to the creepers that did introduce us to friends and family this season. It means the world to us. And additionally, since I know a lot of folks are asking about it, if we should talk a little bit about Creep Time Live and some of the giveaways, those are going to kick off, but they are going to kick off on next week's episode. So again, if you want to be included so you could win 2 tickets to Creep Time Live in your nearest city, as well as backstage passes, or meet and greet passes rather, all you have to do is go to creeptime.com/giveaways, enter in your email, select your nearest city, 1 entry per person. This applies to those who haven't gotten their tickets and those who have. So if you already got your tickets, you're automatically included in the giveaway. Again, next week we will start by announcing Los Angeles. We cannot wait to see you there.
Hell yeah. Oh my God, I'm getting so excited.
I know. Hold up. This coffee needs to be down my gullet. 1 second.
That coffee, between this story, my excitement for tour, and that coffee, we're about to catapult into the next stratosphere.
I think maybe subconsciously it just makes me feel very delicate to hold a coffee this big. I'm like, I'm so tiny. I'm sitting here full on Shrek.
Cutesy.
So, thank you again to everybody who has participated in that giveaway thus far. I will also just shift us in before we're going to jump into the story so we could chat a little bit about Magic Mind, because there is a new update. They are extending that Black Friday deal of the 50% off through December 6th. So this week only.
Hell yeah.
So when this episode comes out, it will be December 6th. So today is your day, baby. Go and get the Magic Mind.
Go get it right away, right now.
So baby, you have
expires.
1 hour until...
Also, you know what I was thinking about?
Yeah.
It's actually a great gift to get yourself, but also
Totally.
because you will get the subscription, you can give it to other people. Like I know Silas and I do that all the time. We give away our Magic Mind boxes and people love them. So
They do.
think about it just for you and for friends and family too. It's kind of like a one and done deal.
100% agree. It's such a nice thing to get for somebody because they feel like there's a little bit of ambiguity with something like Magic Mind or a wellness shot for people, where people are at the edge of it, but they don't want to take that plunge into actually trying it to see, does it help improve my mental clarity, my focus, my performance? So when you gift it to somebody and you get 50% off doing so it's cheaper for you, the purchaser, it just makes a world of difference for somebody, and it's a gift they can really appreciate. I think that's a great idea, to be honest.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then you can both be in a gentle state of mind together.
Something you and I could both use at this present time, because I am out of magic mind, as I learned.
And we're at home right now, so we're like, where's the magic mind?
I know. I'm going to New York tonight, so
Withdrawals.
I'm going from one chaos to another chaos. But again, creepers, make sure to use that 50% off code that is only valid through, I believe, the day that this episode comes out, December 6th. You can check the link down in the description for magicmind.com/creeptimebf. And with that,
Ooh.
are you ready for this?
I'm so ready.
Okay. So, where shall we begin to get into the mystery of Cherita Thomas? Do you want to look at that first page of the
Sure.
pictures that I sent you? It's crazy because that is really the only known photo of Cherita that I could find. There is virtually nothing on her visually.
Wild. Oh my God. Okay. And she's 21 in this picture.
Yeah, she was 21 when she
Okay.
vanished. And I forget what I have on that first page. I should probably look at it. But there might be some pictures of the town, maybe some pictures of the bars, the tavern that she was
Yeah.
at that night. But I'm going to piece all of this together. So just to sort of set up the night of and kind of approach this as if we're piecing the investigation together in real time, this is what we know because I don't have a lot of backstory on her. There is very, very skimpy information. Cherita Janice Thomas was a 21-year-old woman, and while the official information on her backstory, as I mentioned, was scarce, given the time period and possibly the lack of, I'm going to guess, media interest in her story at the local level, these are the only things that I was able to concretely uncover. She was engaged, and she was living with her fiancé at the time. His name was William Merritt, and together they already had a 4-year-old daughter. Now, the two were living in an apartment in this part of Michigan, which was within the Osable Township, right? There might be a map on the first page or the second page, but I'll hold off on directing you to that just yet. But there is one thing that I want to call out right off the bat while I was digging up some information on this location that was period specific to the year 1980 when she vanished. The population in this area was predominantly white and predominantly very, very conservative, from what I read. Something that is contextually important to Cherita's disappearance because she was a young Black woman, and this area did not at all have a good reputation for being a welcoming place for Black families, some of which could play into the racial motivations that are potentially linked to her disappearance. So it was described that Cherita was definitely noticed locally. People did not see a lot of Black families or Black women around town, so when she arrived there, and when people would see her out and about at the bars or at the stores, people zeroed into it. And in large part, I would make the argument that this might have been the reason that the media, at least at the local level, didn't cover her story all too much, and why this has been such a pain to kind of get this information together and really pry into some of the records. There are no newspaper articles from the time period of what happened to her. So Cherita Thomas, let's just focus on the night she vanished. This is August 3rd, 1980. What goes down? Now, she had a plan to go out. She was going to go out with her friend and neighbor at the time. Her name was Patricia Call. And the initial plan was that they were going to go out, they were going to grab a couple of drinks together, kind of have a girls' night, and they were going to have their kids with a babysitter. And they would just go to a local bar to start the evening. According to the official reports that I found from that night, the two had dropped their kids off with the babysitter, which I believe was at Patricia's house, and they went out together to the Hilltop Bar. I don't know if you have a picture of that on maybe the second page. You do?
Yeah. I can see it, and I can see the inside of it.
Creepers, I mean, for anyone who isn't looking at this on Reddit, because we will have these photos up on Reddit, if I could describe it, doesn't it kind of look to you like it's just like a very local, rural kind of towny bar?
Very, very towny. It almost looks like a bingo hall, to be perfectly honest.
Totally,
It's not
totally. Yes,
typical bar setup. It's like those I don't know what you call them, like club chairs or whatever, and then a bunch of tables. It honestly looks like you go there and you play bingo.
I think it's crazy you say that because I think even in 1980, it was skewed towards a bit of an older local crowd.
Okay.
A little bit. I don't know if they were specifically using it for community events like bingo or something like that, but I know what you mean. I do get that vibe.
Very rural, though. I would say that's spot on.
Totally. So they are at the Hilltop Bar. That is stop one. Now, I'm just going to preface by saying I'm pretty sure, 95% sure that is the correct Hilltop Bar, although I found a few conflicting reports, but I'm going to assume that that's it. How many hilltop bars could there be unless they moved?
Sure.
Now, if I could set the scene of this bar, it is casual. It's kind of bustling. It's pretty, crowded for this evening. And while they're there, they run into a man, a local named Jimmy Nelson. Jimmy, I read, was the brother-in-law of the babysitter who was watching the kids, but I'm gonna throw a red flag up for that because I found two conflicting reports on that, and it seems like the information is a little muddy, and it's also never referenced again in the case because one report says that the babysitter was actually Patricia's sister, and I'm like, well, if is the brother-in-law, then he must be the husband of one of Patricia's other sisters, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like,
I'm
and
like,
I feel
two cousins twice removed. I'm like,
Yeah,
hold on. There's a relation there, though, if that were the case.
I know it's rural, but I mean, well, I was just confused by it. And I was like, I feel like if that was true, that would have been a bigger point in the case, like the relationship.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to toss it out for now because nowhere else did I see it referenced that the babysitter was Patricia's sister. But Jimmy Nelson, let's focus on this man. So Jimmy is important to focus on specifically because he is rough. He's a local. He works for a logging company. He drinks nearly every single day at that bar. Categorical alcoholic, as many people would describe him. He has a pretty horrifically violent history in this town. I mean, he gets into fights, some had said daily. But one of the most critical details here is his outward and open racism. He is very openly racist in this bar on this very night, very frequently using the N-word, and he has no qualms whatsoever, no shame about expressing any of it. Something that Cherita, being possibly the only person of color in that bar that night, took immediate notice of, and she felt incredibly uncomfortable, rightfully so. So she, goes to Patricia and she says, hey, could we leave? I would really like to get out of here because from the reports that I read from the witnesses at the bar, he had talked, Jimmy Nelson, directly to Cherita. And I'm going to wager that he most definitely said something offensive if he didn't outright use the N-word to her. So she goes to Patricia and she says, I want to leave, which they do. The next phase of this timeline is that both women end up going back in Patricia's sedan, and they make their way to the Mikado Tavern. And I think they're going to go there to have dinner, but this is a place where the racial tensions of this town only increased. Do you have a picture of the Mikado Tavern by chance?
I do, yeah.
Okay.
Also very rural, kind of on the outside. But I mean, we're in a very small town, I imagine.
Yeah, it's strange because I think the Hilltop, I could be a little off on the timing of this, but I think the Hilltop bar is actually much closer to where the two women lived because I should say they were neighbors. They were friends and neighbors. Whereas the Mikado Tavern was, I think, maybe close to 15 or 20 minutes north, if you look at a map.
Okay. Yeah.
But they end up going there. Again, it does feel very rural. You're right, like a duplicate almost of the Hilltop. So they end up going there for dinner. Given the nature of this area and it being 1980, the two women sit down for dinner, and what was described was that the whole room immediately looked at them, immediately zeroed in on Cherita. And people started whispering, people started snickering, and it was brutal, it was uncomfortable, and it was horrifying enough to the point where Cherita most definitely took notice, and the two women left the table, went to the bathroom just to get away from the staring and the whispers in that sort of dining hall. Now, the two women decide that it's uncomfortable. They want to skip dinner completely, so they end up coming back to the table, speaking with the server and saying that they're going to leave. They don't feel comfortable. And as they're leaving, Patricia remembered that one of the diners, I believe it was one of the diners, said, "Don't come back." So we have a pretty horrific scene here of Cherita being one of the only Black women in this area, and it seems that the racism is not isolated to just a local like Jimmy Nelson. This seems to be a town-wide situation.
Yeah. I wonder how many times she had experienced it before this, or if this was a relatively new experience, at these two spots, or if she kind of knew the drill but wanted to have a night out with her friend. What a terrible predicament to be in.
It was, I mean, I wish there was more information because I thought the same thing. I was like, I wonder if she was new. She must have been somewhat new to this area, but I couldn't find information about when she had moved there. I couldn't find information about what she did for work. It is truly just this story and on. The only backstory is the fiance, the apartment in town, and the 4-year-old daughter. But I did read that she had gone out of her way whenever she did move there to try to make friends with people locally, right? She had an awareness that she was on the outskirts of this town and that she needed to find a way where she was going to make friends with somebody. Patricia just happened to be the first person, possibly the only person that she was friends with.
And remind me, Patricia is white?
I believe so. From everything I read, Patricia is white. Yes. So the timeline accounts for the two women leaving the tavern and then attending a nearby softball game, which I'm pretty sure from what I read, Patricia knew somebody who was playing in that softball game, which is why it was her idea. This brings us to around 10 p.m., where after the game, all the women, like Cherita, Patricia, and the softball teammates, they all go back to the original tavern as kind of like a post-game celebration. But this is the same tavern that they had just left because of the racial tensions. So it is unclear after they arrived back at this tavern just how long Cherita had stayed, but she didn't feel comfortable yet again. She did not want to come back there. She just kind of went along with it. And she immediately went to Patricia and she said, "Hey, do you think that we could leave?" It's possible that she was tired. It's possible she wasn't feeling social. I'm going to wager that it's more than likely that given her previous experience that she didn't feel comfortable being in there.
Right.
And Patricia, I could never blame Patricia for what she did here, but this is the catalyst where things start to go wrong. Patricia wants to hang back and she wants to stay with the other people from the softball game and sort of, have a night out and sort of kick it. So what she does is she remains with the group, and maybe she was aloof to how Cherita was really feeling and how sort of horrible this night had been for her. And she says, "Take my keys, take my car, drive back to my house and just, pick up your daughter and you can leave the car in my driveway," right? She's like, "I'll get a ride later that night and I'll see you tomorrow," kind of thing. So she gives her keys and Cherita takes off from that tavern alone. Maybe we should just pause there because what this would mark would be the last time that Patricia has ever seen Cherita alive. The moment that she took off in the AMC Matador, the brown sedan that was Patricia's, to go get her kids, and she would never make it to Patricia's home. What are your initial thoughts on sort of where we're at with the story?
Well, I guess my first thought is, of course, I'm wondering how much she had to drink before she was about to go drive. I also am just wondering, like, her exit, if it was sort of this uncomfortable, like everybody watching her leave, and if she felt like ostracized in that moment. It just feels, and I don't want to like blame Patricia. How could she have known? But it just feels like maybe not the right move to leave your, kind of send your friend off.
It's not like Patricia was completely, in the shadows to like what was going on this night. Like they had left multiple establishments because of very blatant and outward racism towards Cherita. So it was either something that wasn't of importance to Patricia to sort of comfort her friend in that night and go with her, or maybe Cherita downplayed it in the conversation. It was like, you stay. I just really want to go. So I'm just going to get a ride home. And she's like, "Well, no, here, like take my keys." Like the truth is we don't actually know what the conversation was really like. It could have gone multiple different ways, but it does seem strange that Cherita would be allowed to go off on her own, given the circumstances of the night. And given the circumstances that she might have been drinking, or maybe Patricia was drinking too much. And she was like, "I don't even know how I'm going to drive."
Well, and then I'm wondering, how the heck is Patricia getting home?
Probably a ride. I think that was the consensus. Yeah. She was like, "Take my keys, take the car. I'll get a ride home with like one of the girls here," because she's around like a whole group, like a whole softball team. So that was her thinking, I think.
Yeah. Oh, it's just such an eerie feeling to think about her being so alone, just emotionally feeling very alone in this moment. And I know something sinister is about to happen that, it's a feeling that I personally have never known on that sort of level, that I hate that was the setup prior to this terrible incident.
You can feel it looming too. You can feel sort of just the unsettling rumbling before the true like crack of thunder that's about to come.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what this is.
Yeah.
It's knowing that these are the final moments before something terrible is about to happen and we don't actually know what it might be. So, with that said, with the scenario laid out, this is what we've got. And you might be able to see in the pictures that I sent, there is an assumed roadmap of where Cherita might have been driving. Mm-hmm. I don't know why she would have gone this way. Well, actually, I take that back. Maybe I do, because there was no map system, or obviously no phones or anything. So what Patricia had done was she drew out a little roadmap for Cherita to be like, this is how you get home from the tavern, which also makes me think that she's relatively new to the area. you know? Like Patricia is the
Yeah.
established local, whereas Cherita's like, I don't really know these roads. Like, can you tell me how to get back to my apartment, to our apartment complex?
Yeah. Well, that also might give us a little bit of insight that she didn't go to these taverns very often if she didn't know how to get back to her place
I'd agree
from
with that.
them.
I would totally agree with that. It's like dawning on me now, but it makes complete sense. But
Yeah.
that explains why she would have taken the path she would have, because it was a little bit longer, but it was maybe a little bit clearer because it's going to be on a main strip. So Cherita, she is now on the road. We have a little bit of like context into the timeline of her driving that I'll piece together here. So I will admit everything that I'm going to say here, it is not concrete. We don't exactly know where she was leaving from or like exactly at what time, but we can loosely piece it together. What I believe happened based on where her car was reported to have broken down is that she left this tavern. She must have gone to the intersection and then took a left, which would take her all the way down the road to another intersection where she would take a right onto US Route 23. That is where her car was reported to be broken down first. And I think you can see that on the map. Maybe there's a red circle in the area.
Yeah.
Again, it's the longer way to get home, but I believe she was following the map that was drawn out for her. So she gets onto that road. And if we could describe the road, it's somewhat desolate. I mean, you could imagine getting stuck there at night is not going to be a good situation for anybody, let alone a woman or a woman who has been at the receiving end of a lot of racist vitriol for one
Yeah.
night.
Also, in my mind, just from the map you're showing, that it's like right up against the water. I guess maybe a lake, one of the lakes in Michigan or
Yeah.
some body of water. But like those roads, just because I've grown up by the water, like those always tend to be really spooky, like the little routes that go right by. Like, so I've already got a eerie visual.
And this is miles away, I should say, from the apartment. Like, it's not like your car breaks down and you're going to walk it. Like,
Yeah.
although it's a summer night, this would be miles in the dark. It's not a situation you want to find yourself in.
No.
So what are the witness statements that we can piece together from her time on the side of the road after the car breaks down? There are 3 white teenagers, all male, who pulled up to the car, which was sitting on the side of the road to sort of investigate it, and they described that the hood was smoking. Cherita was very on edge. She was very obviously scared of the teenagers approaching the car. She reportedly didn't get out of the car. She just rolled the window down just a little bit to talk to them after they tapped on it. And to their description, they asked her if she needed a ride anywhere, could use a lift. She politely declined, and then they asked her, would you mind if we took a look at the hood? Like, could we lift up the hood and take a look at your car? According to those teenagers, they said that they could spot almost immediately that the radiator was leaking. So one of them went back to their car to retrieve a roll of duct tape, and it sounded like they were going to wrap a hose with the radiator, is what they described. I have absolutely no idea what that would do, how cars work, but that was what their witness statement claimed. This is what's interesting. In the midst of all 3 boys who were, taking care of that hose and patching it up near the radiator, they saw and heard another car race by Cherita's. Although they could not spot the driver and who exactly was inside, whoever it was, they were yelling something out and making an offensive gesture, possibly a racial gesture, towards Cherita. And this person drove a blue truck. Remember that. So after they wrapped up the hose to the radiator, they told her that it's not going to last long, but they think it might get her back maybe a couple of miles down the road, and it could get her home. So Cherita decides to take her chances, and the 3 boys watched her very carefully drive down the dark road for another few miles, apparently in the same direction that the truck had gone that passed her. This would mark the last known sighting of Cherita from these 3 witnesses of that night. The timeline then jumps to around 2:30 a.m. This is when Patricia arrives back to her home, because don't forget, she already gave her the keys like hours before, and she was assuming, I'm going to come back home. My car is going to be in the driveway. Cherita's got her kid, and she's back home at her apartment. When Cherita gets there, she is immediately dismayed because the car is not in the driveway. Her daughter has not been picked up, Cherita's daughter, and Cherita is nowhere to be found. She never made it back. By the early morning, the police are contacted by both Patricia and William, the fiancé, and they immediately connect this to another report that came in from a witness who described an abandoned brown sedan in town. Patricia's car has been found. The car was found parked and to be blocking a driveway on Sunset Road, which I believe I have a street view picture of as well. You might be able to see that. I think on the very last page, actually.
Oh, yeah, I see it.
Yeah, that is where the car was to be found, parked directly in front of somebody's driveway. And what that would mean, if that's correct, like map-wise, it would mean that Patricia had actually made it like very, very far after they had patched up the radiator hose. Like she was actually just 2 blocks away from her apartment building. Extremely close. Is that not insane? That she was...
That's...
If it was her driving, is the thing.
So just remind me, her daughter was at Patricia's and she was driving.
Yeah, sorry. Did I say Patricia? I meant Cherita.
No.
Yeah,
I just want
sorry.
to make sure I know where she was going. So she was going back to Patricia's to get her daughter and then go back to her house.
Yeah, but her house was only two houses over. It was walking distance.
Okay,
Like she was going to drop
gotcha.
off the car, pick up her daughter, and then they would walk back over to Cherita's.
Yeah. So in theory, it's like she could have broken down here. And then even if she had broken down, she was close enough to her place, you're saying, that it's too weird.
2 blocks away. 2 blocks away.
Oh, God.
But nonetheless, we've got this car abandoned in front of this house. It's been there all day on Sunset Road. So police end up showing up. They searched the vehicle and they described in their report, they said the interior was a mess, but I could infer that it was just some kind of a disaster, possibly indicating some sort of a struggle. The remnants of what was left was the hand-drawn map that Patricia had left for Cherita. There were cigarettes believed to belong to Cherita, and then house keys were located. The keys to the brown sedan, the car keys, gone. So this linked police to knock at the door of the man whose home the car was actually in front of. Now, he was a witness who would be important to the story. His name is Frank. He recalled that right around 11 p.m., which timestamp-wise would be directly after the 3 teenagers had actually helped patch up the hose, this car pulled up in front of his home and he heard the car door slam. He looked out his window and what he described to see was a smoking hood, just like the 3 boys described, and a woman, we're going to assume Cherita, exiting the car alone and on foot. He said that she was going to take off in the direction eventually going towards Patricia's home, which, like I said, is 2 blocks away. This is where things go off in the witness statement. Frank heard sometime later that night the same woman reapproaching the sedan. So she had left and came back, and he looked out his window and he saw her approaching the car, only this time she was with a bearded Caucasian man who drove a blue truck. And that truck parked right up to the hood of hers. And at a distance, he couldn't really see what was going down, if they actually knew each other, if this guy was going to jump her car or something, like try to help. But what we know in the context of what the teenagers saw is that if this was more than likely the same blue truck that passed, this is not somebody who liked her. This is somebody who was shouting offensive phrases to her. And then somehow she ran into this person on the road, and they ended up back at the sedan. Not a good scenario.
No.
From this witness, from what he could recollect, the 2 worked on the car for a little bit. He was watching all of this through the window, and then eventually Cherita and this man got into the man's blue truck, and the man drove south, which I believe, again, would have been in the direction of where Cherita and Patricia lived. This was officially the last time that anyone has seen Cherita Thomas. Now, it surprisingly did not take all too long for someone on this case to piece together the potential of this being, of course, an abduction. And then the lead detective on this, I believe his name was Raymond Newt. He was on the case and he was just kind of piecing together like a collection of witness statements from not only the teenagers, from Frank, but from people that might have actually seen her at the tavern, at the Hilltop Bar. He's sort of building out this story when he starts to really piece together that this is probably a lot darker than he anticipated. He heard all about the bar, all about this guy, Jimmy Nelson, the racist remarks at the tavern, the teenagers who witnessed the blue truck making an offensive gesture at her. But as you can probably guess, there is, of course, one clear name that it keeps rooting back to that I just mentioned. It's Jimmy Nelson, the first man who saw her, who was seen speaking to her, and was seen actively using the N-word towards her. This is somebody who might have had it out for her. And what we would piece together is a lot more damning for his story. But first, initial reactions to the actual disappearance before we're going to get into the investigation and what this looks like.
Well, my stomach was turning thinking about the moment that the blue car would have pulled up, because I'm thinking about Cherita. Did she clock if it was Jimmy, who it was? And was it like a oh crap moment. Like I
Like it could have been
recognize that
too
guy
late
from the bar.
almost. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I was also thinking about, I guess the way you described it was like the car pulled up kind of in front of her almost like very combative is what it sounds like. Like,
Well, to be clear, she was with him. So what had happened is this witness saw her pull up in the sedan alone. She
Mhm.
walked off on foot in the direction of what he would learn was her home. And then a little while later, she came back in this blue truck with who's presumed to be possibly Jimmy Nelson. And the two get out and it looks like they're trying to like work on the car or something. Doesn't work. Hood is still smoking. She gets back in the truck with this man, the bearded white man. And then they drive off south because here's the ticket that I didn't mention.
Mhm.
Jimmy Nelson happens to live on the same street as Patricia and Cherita.
No. So he's probably seen her before, knew exactly who she was when she came into the bar.
Entirely
if I had
possible.
to guess.
Actually, did you see a picture of Jimmy? I think I have one on maybe
Yeah.
page 3 or 4. You get a vibe.
Yes.
You get a vibe.
Oh, well, the vibe from page 2 was enough. And then page 3, I was like, oh God.
I know years down the line in this case, but like, come on.
Yeah. Very creepy vibes. Very like, he just kind of looks like the type of neighbor that you don't want to mess with or that would have it out for you. Like if you weren't doing the right thing, that he's the type to be like super combative and confrontational.
I started to wonder if he was involved in this, like if it was kind of what you were hinting at, that maybe it was dark and she was tired and she didn't actually realize who was offering her help. And then it clicked too late to the point where she's actually in the passenger seat and she's like, this is the guy from the first bar in the evening. This is the same guy. And now I'm stuck in his truck. But I'm going to keep pressing on here. Oh, sorry. Yeah. No, go on.
Well, the only other thing I was going to say, I was just thinking like, or it's so messed up, but like this weird complex that I feel like happens when somebody is like this racist that then all of a sudden he's like, I'm going to go help this person now, like almost like absolving him of like all the damage he had done previously. And like, I don't even know if that's a possibility, but just he seems like he's a little off his rocker to begin with. So like he sees her and is like, oh, I'm going to help you now. Like it's like a psychological weirdness. I don't know.
No,
or it's very weird.
It's complete bait, for something more sinister that he wants to do. Of like, this is how I sort of get you on my side and get your guard down. And then suddenly when you're in my truck and you're in my possession, that's when this all goes down. But there's actually much more here to incriminate Jimmy than what sort of meets the eye at first glance. Jimmy immediately in this investigation, given the witness statements and the people at the bar who heard him, they were like, no, he was being pretty damn racist towards this woman. He is immediately a person of interest, right? Purely on the proximity of his home, the interactions with Cherita, his history of being an open racist. But to make this matter even more compelling, the Detective Newt, he starts asking around to see if anybody knows what kind of car Jimmy drives. According to the bartender from that night, the night of the disappearance, Jimmy actually drives 2 different vehicles. He has one that is kind of like a reddish orange, like a dark orange truck, and he has a blue Ford Bronco. So
Blue truck.
Let us take a collective breath for just like my blood pressure in this, because like there's so much that's kind of immediately stacking up against Jimmy. It's just, it would seem obvious, but you'll be shocked at the course that this takes, because Jimmy, of course, like I said, he is the immediate focal point, I think, within the first week of this search and investigation for Cherita, because at this point, she's just a presumed like missing person or an abduction. They're not even sure. So not only are they able to confirm the claims about the blue truck that he drives, a record would actually show, one that I found, that in the same week that Cherita went missing, a woman had called in to the local police in this county and filed a report against Jimmy for an alleged sexual assault.
Oh,
so
grand.
We now have even more backing to suggest that it's very possible Jimmy could be, we know he's a violent person from the fights he gets into, but he could be a sexually violent person towards women. And we have a woman that he very clearly did not like, was very clearly racist towards, that has now gone missing and was possibly last seen with him. It's not looking like a good setup for Mr. Nelson here. So an initial interview would take place where Detective Newt actually brings Jimmy Nelson in, where Jimmy denies ever knowing who Cherita was. He said, I've never even seen this person. I've never talked to her. He's like, and I definitely wasn't out driving that night. None of which is true, even in the slightest. We have multiple witness statements from the Hilltop Bar, specifically that bartender on the night of August 3rd, where they clearly witnessed him speaking to Cherita one-on-one. It was the whole inciting incident for why she wanted to leave the Hilltop Bar. So he's lied for part one, but despite the blatant lying, this detective kind of slips up, I'm going to say, at least at this point in the investigation, because his initial focus on Jimmy Nelson shifts over to someone else, because there is a word that's spreading out in the county of a different criminal, this man that's at large, that apparently had a very similar description to the last person that Cherita might have been seen with. This person had a history of violence towards women. He was a bearded white man, just like Frank, the witness, saw, and he also drove a blue truck. Now, it's difficult to say why they would shift over to this person versus Jimmy Nelson, like why he would be the more compelling option. But for whatever reason, they do. It is a complete derail of the investigation. And it took the heat off Jimmy, which I think was entirely illogical. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, and maybe, I don't know, a thought of why they might have shifted their course so heavily towards this other suspect.
Yeah, so it's just some random, it's like somebody, we don't know their name, we just know that they're involved in like, did you say assault or criminal activity in general?
He was a criminal at large, where I think his actual crime, he had a whole stack of crimes, but I think the one that he was like on the run for was that he had recently tried to, it was a robbery gone wrong. I think he tried to rob a residence. It went wrong. Somebody tried to combat him. He shot the homeowner. And then he was on the run for that. They knew he drove the blue truck. They knew he was a white guy with a beard. They knew he was definitely driving around and hiding out in this area. And the timeline did kind of loosely match to Cherita. The question was, why Cherita? You know, like, why would he cross paths? Like, if he's on the run, like, why take the time to hunt this woman down? You know,
and we already know that we have a person of interest that was in the facility where she was last seen, like
actually interacted with her. I'm like, that seems like the person that's likely to kill you is the person that knows you. You know what I mean?
Saw like, you, yeah. Do we know, like, did Jimmy have any connection to law enforcement or anything? Why would they?
Not that I read. I mean, again, everybody's friends with somebody. Everybody's got an uncle somewhere, but I didn't read anything about that. He was truly just, he worked for a logging company. He was kind of a loner at the local level. And again, he had a pretty soiled reputation, if not even just as a racist, but as like a drunk, like a local drunk who would get into fights at the bar.
That was kind of my thought, is that maybe he had a reputation of being just like a nuisance, and that police were like, oh God, like, let's not deal with this guy. Like, let's look at this other person, I guess, which it sounds really counterintuitive, but let's look at this other person that has a lot of criminal charges against them, because we don't really want to deal with Jimmy Nelson.
God, I hope that wasn't the case. That would be so horrible.
Yeah. So well, maybe they didn't even think he was capable of it. Maybe they thought, oh, he's just a drunk.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I will get into here that I think really tipped this, because I do think, to your point, I think there were a number of people who were on the fence within law enforcement. There were some who were like, I don't think it was Jimmy. I don't think he could have been capable of it, maybe, or I don't think he could have done this. It got to look at the real criminal who's on the run and is maybe spiraling out. But there were others, like this detective, like Detective Newt, who was like, well, I don't really want to leave Jimmy Nelson behind in this investigation. Like, he could really be the guy. And if we pull focus back too much, what we're doing is we're buying him time to build up his story. The thing that ended up tipping it, which I am going to get into here, about this criminal suspect who drove the blue truck, the other guy, his name was actually Grant Godard. Again, he was described as this like violent, like federal fugitive at this point. And he had last been seen in the area in the pickup truck. So that was building up the profile that he could have been the guy. The thing that really tipped it was that Grant's own son came forward to police and made a claim that Grant was responsible for Cherita's murder.
Oh my God.
So I think this is when most of the investigative force actually shifted gears, and they were like, all right, well, if we've got a guy who fits the description, criminal at large, and his own son is coming forward out of the woodworks to be like, no, my dad killed this woman. We've got to put all of our focus on this guy and forget about Jimmy Nelson. That's what I imagined happened. So in the investigation, they do find the truck. It is eventually found. It is abandoned and it's stripped, which we're going to assume was to hide evidence. Again, possibly encouraging the motive, or at least the scenario that he really could have been involved in the abduction and murder of Cherita Thomas. After the son comes forward and talks about how this could have been his father, the case is effectively nearing what they think is going to be a close, but we don't have a body and something still feels like it's missing. But for investigators that have no other lead or no direction to go and no trail towards a body, this case is kind of like sitting in that gray area where they're like, we have two really like sizable and like credible trails that we could go down looking for a person of interest or the culprit here. We just don't have enough to actually nail either one of them. And it sits in this limbo of just being a cold case. So for more than a decade, the mystery of Cherita Thomas and the night that she vanished, it kind of haunted this town, this area, where all while Jimmy Nelson, he just sort of continued to sort of parade through town in his blue Ford Bronco, which he eventually did retired that vehicle, and it was sort of hidden in his backyard, which we'll get into. And it just sort of seemed to some investigators that maybe Jimmy is somebody they should have relooked at. Maybe he did get away with the perfect crime. So there were some junior officers, and I believe detectives, who kind of watched this very closely, and we're going to fast forward all the way 13 years later to 1993, after this disappearance case catches a second wind. Because Cherita's abduction was presumed to be racially motivated, there was new legislation that was introduced, I believe, in the early 90s that allowed for one of the new detectives who was, rising through the ranks and was looking at her case. They could now classify her disappearance as being linked to a hate crime, which allowed them, so I read, the possibility to get this opened up and get the FBI involved. So for that, we have to thank Detective Alan McGregor. He had watched this story for literally more than a decade since he was a patrol officer, just waiting to rise and climb through the ranks to get to like a senior detective level so he could actually take action and figure out what really happened to Cherita on the night of August 3rd. So Alan McGregor, this detective, he first probed the son of Grant, the guy, the fugitive that they caught, and he wanted to repiece together that story. And he's like, why did you say that your dad was responsible for Cherita's murder? Like, what did you hear? What did you know? And he uncovered some very troubling information. Grant's son had made up the story. He had made up the story completely that Grant was involved in Cherita's murder because when Grant had originally shot that homeowner, the caretaker, during like the robbery gone wrong, I can't remember if he was a homeowner or a caretaker, but he had shot him. He tried to pin it on his own son because his son was younger. And he said, you're a non-offender and you're younger, so they're going to give you less time. If they get me, they're going to put me away for life. So he pinned it on his own son, and went to court to testify against his son. So this was his son's way of exacting revenge on his own dad. Was he found the story of Cherita Thomas and tried to pin it on his dad when he read about the blue truck. Grant never even knew who Cherita Thomas was. Never saw her. Oh my
God. As an investigator, that must just be like the worst feeling.
I mean, it's like shattering, but it was really under the previous kind of, I guess, administration of like investigators and detectives who were looking at this, because this is what Alan wanted. Alan wanted to climb the ranks so that he could probe and ask these questions and dispel the story that Grant was actually involved, which brings us right back to square one, where we need to relook at Jimmy Nelson. This was only going to be the beginning of Grant's attempts to get the truth here. So from the description of how he investigated this, he felt particularly close to the case, and he at times started to feel that he was so close to the investigation that he felt like a part of Cherita's family in trying to constantly find new leads, constantly make new phone calls. He had this weird habit where at his desk, every time he would like shift and like bump into something, he made a deal with himself that he would have to pick up the phone and call a new person who could have known something or seen something about the night Cherita disappeared. Which almost seemed, it reminded me of the Lady of the Dunes, actually. I think that investigator had a similar thing where like every time he knocked something, like a specific thing on his desk, he would have to call and try to find a new lead in that case.
That's so funny. It like is reminding me, I know sidebar, but it reminds me of like, you always say like call out synchronicities. It's like that kind of similar motivator.
Yeah. I'm still doing that, but I don't know where I draw the line on calling out synchronicities, because I'm like, I call out omens and synchronicities in the same, and I'm like, maybe I shouldn't do that with the omens.
Maybe not with the omens, baby.
Every time I see 666, I call it out. There's a house in my town where the house numbers are 666.
That's so dark. I noticed a building in DC recently that's 666, huge up on the like the top of the building, and I was like, that's so dark. Who decided that?
They probably got a great deal on the real estate, to be honest.
The truth.
So I will get us back on track here. So like I said, Detective Allen, he is really forging the way forward, where he's like, I am going to close this case. And by 1995, he would redirect that energy back to the original person of interest, as I said, Jimmy Nelson himself. Now, the accusations and the witness statements of the outward and blatant racism from that night were very well documented. Even a quote that was overheard from the bar, I believe possibly from the bartender, where Jimmy allegedly said, "The only good N-word is a dead one." And deliberately, he wanted to omit certain things in his account of the story when he was initially interviewed on that night. I believe, let's see, full context said it was about Cherita Camas. Oh, this is what he was saying. He was saying that if he was spewing racial vitriol, it wasn't directed towards Cherita. And I'm like, the only black person in the room. Again, for the 15th time, the person that everybody saw you talking to, he was like, I never even saw her. I was just speaking my mind, is what he's saying. So let's just recap a little bit of like where we're at by 1995, because we're 15 years into this. Jimmy is our focal point. Jimmy is a racist, clear intentions of malice towards Cherita on the night of August 3rd. We know he talked to her. We have those witness statements at the Hilltop Bar from the manager of the bar. I'm going to omit her name just for the sake of the story, because I don't know if she wants to be involved in this case in any which way, but she has been kind of instrumental in terms of like her witness statements and how her story has stayed the same. She claimed that following Cherita's disappearance, something changed, because she saw Jimmy every day because he was in that bar almost every day. But she said after Cherita went missing, Jimmy suddenly didn't seem very racist, which is kind of what you were talking about before, where like, there's a weird psychological flip where you try to make good, or at least present as good. He toned down all of his remarks. He pretty much kept to himself. He apparently stopped driving his blue Ford Bronco, and it was parked and sort of hidden in the backyard. So he just seemed to kind of lay low immediately after Cherita went missing. And it should also be noted by 1995, outside of retiring the blue Ford Bronco, that he had really taken an interest in hiding that thing. He had started to build this like pile of, I believe it was firewood, what I read, in front of the blue Ford Bronco, so that even if you passed his property and you could like peer to the backyard to see if there was something back there, you probably from a distance wouldn't be able to make out, oh, he's got an extra truck parked behind his place. That's strange. But then this would take an even more damaging twist, because Detective Allen is, accumulating all this information. He goes to speak with Jimmy, finds out that the blue Ford Bronco was actually sold by 1995. He completely ditched it. It is gone.
Crap.
Here is where things are going to start to fly off the rails. Detective Allen, he is dead sure. He's like, Jimmy is the guy. So he starts to play a little bit of dirty. He does a little bit of bad cop here, and he starts to lead a one-on-one interview with Jimmy, where he leads into it by saying that he knows information that Jimmy doesn't. And he says, we have evidence that you are flat out lying. We have evidence to prove that Cherita Thomas was in your car that night. And according to Allen, this spooked Jimmy enough to where he allegedly confessed and said, okay, maybe I was with her that night, but when I last saw her, she was alive. A complete deviation from his previous story to say that he never even knew who the woman was. Now he's saying, yeah. But it's a very careful selection of words to say, I was with her that night, because in our minds, we're insinuating, so this means that she was in the truck. But it could have been that he meant I was with her in the bar. And then that was the last I saw of her. It's such a careful, I don't believe it was intentional, but it was a clever selection of words.
Yeah.
But you would think this is a smoking gun confession. But the choice of words complicate it a lot, because they cannot arrest him. It's not enough to arrest him. And with no body, there is no proof of murder. So to complicate the statement even further, over the next 5 or so years, Detective Allen, he gets the FBI even more involved. Jimmy ends up reverting back to the original story by the time the FBI start to question him. And he says, I don't know Cherita. Never saw her, never interacted with her even one night. So he's changed his story 3 times over now.
Right.
It's like, it must be infuriating from an investigator's standpoint, but this would take us all the way to the year 2000, where the case has stalled yet again. Because if Jimmy is going back on the other story that he told to Detective Allen, where do we go from here? But by 2001, with all of the inconsistencies pointing back to, again, Jimmy, the FBI, they are kind of wrestling with whether or not they want to take the heat off this and just chalk it up to saying it's a cold case, or whether they really want to put more resources, more effort into pursuing whether they can really nail Jimmy, or if they're even confident that they can find a body that's going to nail him. So Jimmy ends up sitting down for another interview, changes his story yet again. This is insane. So the FBI had gotten tipped off that Jimmy has kind of been chatting with some locals. And on the morning that he went in for this interview with the FBI, he said that he saw a hypnotist and now his memory was entirely clear. And he's like,
my God.
I know. Like, basically what had happened was they were accumulating the information that Jimmy was kind of going around to locals, and he was trying to replant some details of the story that of the night Cherita went missing. One of which was that he was telling everybody he was driving a red truck the night that she went missing, which he wasn't. The bartender, again, I can't say her name, but she remembered. She was like, no. He was driving a blue truck. I remembered it. It was his blue Ford Bronco. So at this point, they're like, he's not only changing his story and now changing his story for possibly a third or fourth time over, but he's going around town and trying to actively change the details of the night. Jimmy suddenly comes clean. And once he says his memory is clear after seeing this hypnotist, he remembers how the night went down. He says he was the man who picked up Cherita. He was the guy in the blue truck with the beard, and that he did try to help her. But then when he went back to the car and the car couldn't start, he drove her to Patricia's, where she went in and picked up her purse and then another item. And then he drove her and dropped her off at a different bar in town. And that was the last he saw of her. Which would seem like a pretty damn clear confession that, like, all right, buddy, you really are the last person who was with this woman. Like, concrete confirmation. The problem with that story, and somebody who would be as stupid as to do this, and it infuriates me that they could get away with a crime like this, none of this actually happened. None of this. Because let's poke holes in that story. He said that he picked her up and brought her to Patricia's, where she ran in to grab a purse. For one, she didn't have a house key to Patricia's place. Two, her purse was actually found in her own home, in her apartment, so she definitely didn't get a purse. And three, the bar that he said he dropped her off at was not actually a bar. It was a restaurant, and it closed at 8 p.m. that night. So none of this story means anything. If anything, he's just trying to build a fake story on a truth, in that the truth being he actually did pick her up. Like, he actually was the man on the side of the road. Just thoughts on, like, the chaos of this man.
I was going to say, this is like the case of made up stories, first of all.
It's so difficult to keep a through line because I'm like, what is the story?
Well,
he changed it so
crazy?
much.
I was just thinking to myself, was he still drinking during this whole time? Like, if he was a full-blown alcoholic, I wonder if he was just making things up and believing them. Like, it is really bonkers that he decided to, because I personally don't believe that he is a sharp enough tool in the shed to, like, come up with this whole cockamamie story to kind of throw the scent off.
Cockamamie, baby. Cockamamie.
Cockamamie. I just feel like he's all over the place. Like that. And as an investigator, I would be like, it's just really frustrating, because I do believe there's truth there that he was with her that night.
Agreed.
And now it's all muddied by all these additional details that I don't know if he really believes that, or if, but regardless, I guess we have the one concrete thing, which is that he was with her that night. He did have her in his car.
Yes, which I believe. And I have to reread to see if he goes back on that story yet again, but it does seem concrete. I mean, because, like, why else would he go out of his way to, like, build a false story that also kind of incriminated him as being the last person to pick her up? So I agree with you. I do think that was true. The strange part about it, because it really is, like, partially weaponized incompetence that's, like, aiding him in this, but also he is intentional to know that he did something wrong and that he's trying to cover his ass, because he was going around town replanting evidence with people to be like, you know, that night that Cherita went missing, I wasn't driving my blue truck. I had my red truck with me, so I couldn't be the guy. Like, he's speaking to people about this. So he knows what he's doing at a certain level. Yeah. But Detective Allen, he's like, this is bull. I'm going to take this into my own hands. I'm not dealing with this guy anymore. He is a serial liar. And the only way that we can really nail him and close Cherita's case is if we find a body. And I believe that body is on Jimmy's property. He has a deer camp, right? This big, like, patch of land he's got. So he leverages some pretty big ammunition here. Detective Allen taps Sandra Anderson. Do you see a picture of her and her dog?
Is she the one with the dog? Yeah.
I need you to strap your ass in.
Well, when I saw the dog, I was like, "Oh,
I'm
how I
just,
feel about the
I'm
dog."
just going to tell you right now, you're not prepared for like which direction this is going to go. But yes, truly, like when the dog comes in, that's when we're like, it's a wrap.
It's a wrap.
Truly a
Yeah.
wrap. Like when you get the canines in, the story is pretty much finished. She comes in because she is a famed handler, like dog handler, and she has a very well credentialed and legendary, like very, very accurate cadaver dog. I believe this dog was actually known to wrap up so many cases that in the media they referred to him as like the canine Sherlock Holmes. So the goal is to bring in the big guns, tap Sandra, and get her and the canine and a warrant to search the deer camp. And hopefully, 20 years after the fact, they can uncover the remains of Cherita Thomas and give this case proper closure. So the cadaver dog, the name is Eagle. It's brought to the scene. They get the warrant and everything. There's a whole search team. And this dog, again, has the impeccable track record for finding remains. Now, what they do stumble upon, timeline-wise, I believe the investigation, or the search rather, had started in the fall of that year, I think around November. It would take only a matter of weeks before Eagle, the cadaver dog, does in fact recover multiple severed bone fragments on the deer camp belonging to Jimmy Nelson. They were submitted for testing by the winter of that year, which I think was 2002. But to everyone's shock, the bones that were initially found were not a match for Cherita. They were bones belonging to 3 different unidentified human bodies on Jimmy Nelson's property.
They were human?
Human bones. They believe what they uncovered might be a mass grave, potentially of Jimmy Nelson, the serial killer, what they were finding. So this, sort of prompted an even larger investigation, because they were saying, we were looking for Cherita. We might be looking for a whole horde of people now who have gone missing, and they could all be on this one property. But somewhere in the mix, Detective Allen believes Cherita Thomas's bones lie. So with the prospect of uncovering this evidence, Jimmy, now being a serial killer and trying to prosecute him for that, it is resumed by April of 2002, this search, where Sandra and the cadaver canine are brought back with the warrant to uncover more evidence on the deer camp. Within just 72 hours, something else is found. So Sandra calls the team over. She's the handler for the dog to this nearby creek bed where Eagle has located another bone fragment. But something seemed a little off about this for a second. There were two bone fragments that were found in this area, and this was an area that they had searched just something like 24 hours ago, and they had found nothing. So don't forget, this property is still somewhat new to them. It's very large. It's somewhat foreign, and it is Jimmy Nelson's. Is it possible that somebody could be tampering with or trying to recover certain evidence or certain remains in this place? There are 2 young participants in the search, one who I believe was a lab technician who sort of conspired the following day to sort of keep their eyes peeled to see if during the search there was anything suspicious that they saw on the deer camp while they were hunting for these bones. So the following day, while searching near another creek bed, there is a call out that comes from Sandra, and she says Eagle found something else. Only this time, there is that young lab technician who is watching her very closely and decides to take a chance and ends up grabbing Sandra's hand, the dog handler. And the 2 of them start screaming. They start like wrestling over this. They're yelling at each other when finally Sandra's palm pops open and bones fall out of her hand. Sandra, the cadaver dog handler, has been planting evidence the whole goddamn time.
What in God's name?
I'm telling you, the way
I'm
my
like, hold
jaw
on, where are
unhinged.
we? I'm like, we're in Michigan. Remind me never to go to this town. What in the world?
I mean, to be fair, Sandra was like an out-of-towner because she was like nationally famous for like solving so many cases. She had done thousands of cases with this damn dog.
But she was like a con artist.
She was a fraud because the success of solving the cases was so much more important to her than actually uncovering the truth. She was planting bone fragments at crime scenes.
I feel so bad for Cherita and her family in this moment right now. Like, it's
a killer for the case. I mean, if you compromise like effectively what could have been a crime scene like that, almost none of it can hold up in court. Like, it's actually disastrous for Detective Allen. He's sick over it. So Sandra,
thank God the lab technician was there. Sorry.
Oh my God. No. I mean, thank God they had noticed this before, because I think they saw something the day before where they were like, did you see when she like bent down near her boot? Because every time she had found something, the dog was very, very close, and she would always like bend down to her boot, like looking at the ground, and then all of a sudden a bone would appear, and they're like, That's weird. We searched that same area like yesterday. We like scoured. We found nothing. So they were just keeping a close eye on her, and lo and behold, when she gets arrested and they take her back to her vehicle, they search it. There is a bag in her car of human bones. She had a
Yeah,
whole
where the hell did she
bag
get those?
from some like medical supply facility or something. I mean, like
Oh my God.
completely unrelated to any of the cases she was ever on. She was a serial like conspirator, like implanting all of this evidence on these various scenes, which completely shot the credibility of any of the scenes that her and this cadaver dog had worked previously. So what she would do is she would hide these bones in her sock and her boot, and when she crouched down to inspect, like I said, she would pull one out, toss it, and let the dog discover it. And everybody just believed this dog is miraculous. It can find anyone. This was certain death for the case in a lot of ways, because not only this story, but countless cases that had already seen their way through to a conviction had to be re-examined, because she had put people behind bars on bones that she had planted on properties. Like, and this was spanning back hundreds and thousands of cases that she had looked at. So Sandra would face charges for this fraud. And shockingly, this shocked me, she only got 2 years in prison for this, which I was like, you put people in prison for longer than the time that you will serve for planting this evidence on multiple different high-profile investigations.
Oh my God. Well, I'm sure she had some sort of slippery con artist way to get out of all the damage she had done. My God.
It was like encourageable to like read about that. And I do think at a certain, like early on in her career, the cadaver dog was working as a cadaver dog, and maybe she did truthfully solve some cases. But again, it's the sickness of the fame and like the demand for a high profile cadaver dog like that and the handler that was fueling this, where she's like, we just have to be a success over and over. But what does this mean for Cherita's case? We are still left with a very big problem here, because there is no evidence of Cherita's murder in connection to Jimmy Nelson and his property, and we have a compromised property, a compromised crime scene because of Sandra. Nonetheless, Detective Allen is absolutely convinced that Jimmy is the culprit, and he pushes on to try to see this through to a proper conviction. Now, the timeline of Jimmy Nelson's downfall here is a bit complex, so I am going to attempt to sort of streamline it into a number of years for the sake of our story. By 2004, Detective Allen officially charged Jimmy, and he is arrested. There are a multitude of crimes and charges that were encompassed in this 2004 charge, but if we can fast forward 6 years down the line from those initial charges, this is when a jury officially convicts Jimmy Nelson of the murder of Cherita Thomas, even without a body. Jimmy would face spending the rest of his days behind bars for that murder. However, in February 2014, the case against Jimmy Nelson was overturned, and he would be exonerated. According to the court records that I could find, I had initially assumed, I was like, they threw this out because there was no body and somebody challenged it. According to what I found in these reports and what I read on the Charlie Project, there is some new evidence in 2014 that surfaced that they believe could implicate another individual in Cherita's murder. Under those circumstances, the jury would probably not find Jimmy Nelson to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The evidence has been sealed from the public, so we don't know what it is. It could be something very minor. It could be as sizable as possibly even the discovery of remains, her actual body. But it is unclear whether or not anybody else will face charges, because we're almost 10 years after the fact and there has been no update on this case. But this is where it stands. In this very strange and sort of convoluted aftermath of this mystery, there is the looming question: if there is new evidence that seems to link to another person, why would Jimmy Nelson have gone to the lengths that he did to lie multiple times over in an attempt to hide his truck, to bribe witnesses and change the story, and all of these theatrics, if at the end of the day, he was truly just innocent? You know?
Well, God, there's a part of me that was running through it in my head. Did he do all of that because he actually really didn't kill her, but he knows he was with her that night? Like he had at some point picked her up. I mean, this seems so unlikely, but just the weird chance that he actually had her in his car at one point, and then something happened right after that we don't know. And that
like he really did drop her off, and then something.
Yeah. And that he just kind of like in his, sorry to say this, but like crackpot mentality was like, I'm just going to start saying I saw a hypnotist and I whatever, like just trying to wrap it up to take some of the heat off of him because he did know, like, yeah, I was with her that night, but I didn't actually do it.
Like, he's kind of like, I see what you're saying. Like, he's kind of packaging the truth encased in like something that's fabricated, so the whole thing looks like a lie between like the
Yeah.
hypnotist and everything. He's like, but the truth is, I did see her. I did feel bad about what I said while I was drunk or something. He's like, and then I tried to help her with her car, but then I really did just drop her off. But he had packaged it up in this casing that was so fabricated and false, and like had a few lies baked into it, that the whole thing seemed non-credible. Or we could be reading too much into this, where maybe new evidence was found that could potentially look to another person. But again, if there's no progress on that front,
Yeah.
who's to say that that really means much of anything? But certainly it was enough to get him exonerated. And what shocked me was that not only did the defense sort of push for this exoneration, the prosecution pushed for it too.
Do you think it's DNA or something?
I have absolutely no idea what it could be.
Yeah.
I have absolutely no idea. And it shocks me that it's been a decade and there's still no movement on that, whether they can't find this individual that they think it's linked to. But I still have a lot of really chilling suspicion around Jimmy's connection to this, solely because he was the last person to see her. And I do not believe, even with the parts of the story that he told that were truthful, where I do believe he really did pick her up in his truck that night, I don't believe we know the whole truth. I do not think he took her back to her place. She definitely didn't get her purse. I don't think he dropped her off at a restaurant. I don't know why she would even ask to be dropped off at a restaurant when they were 2 blocks away from her home. Like, it just didn't make sense.
Yeah, the whole thing, I guess if we think about it, if we break it down and try to think of like what the motivation was it racially motivated? But then if it was, I guess it's like kind of what we were talking about earlier. Why then do this like Good Samaritan thing where you're like dropping her off and doing what, like, it doesn't make any sense.
It could have just, I mean, he might just be he is a horrible person, but he could have just been so wrapped up in the stress and the paranoia of being looked at as a person of interest that he had encased this in a bunch of lies, thinking that he was just going to get the heat off him. But ultimately, he didn't have to do that if he was truly innocent. And maybe he just dug his own grave.
Can I also ask one other thing? I was trying to think back. The second tavern they went to, was he there or he had just been at the Hilltop?
I believe he had just been at the Hilltop. From everything I read, he was only at the Hilltop. She did experience racist vitriol at the tavern that she had gone to after, but Jimmy was not once seen or mentioned in that location.
Which is the other weird thing, because then I'm like, he would have had to have kind of just been right place, right time when she had left the second place and was going back to Patricia's. Which just would have been weird, or he would have been like hiding out, stalking her or something to know where her whereabouts. But
I painted another scenario in my mind. I was thinking about that too. I was like, maybe it's possible. Because, I mean, would he have actually seen what Patricia's car looked like? Would he even know that it was Cherita who was driving Patricia's car that night? You know, like, how would he know that?
Yeah.
So I wondered if the initial passing on the road where he like flipped off. Oh my God, I almost flipped off the camera. I was like, do I have to blur that? Where he had flipped off the car, he just was annoyed that somebody was in the road, like taking up space, and he was drunk driving. So he like just flipped off a car, and maybe that wasn't actually targeted towards Cherita. But then in the process of him getting back to the direction of his house, and they're going in the same direction because don't forget they live on the same damn street. Maybe that's when he saw the car again, and that's when he pulled over, and then he realized who it was. He was like, oh,
yeah,
you're the lady from the bar. And she's like, oh my God, this is the guy from the bar. And it's possible the two tried to have some kind of at least compromise to get her car fixed up or something. Because from what the witness, Frank, said outside of his house, he definitely saw the two of them together, and it was not in like a violent way or anything. She was out of the car. She wasn't restrained. They were talking. He said it looked like they knew each other very well.
That's very, very weird.
It makes it even stranger that there really is no like local backstory to kind of backfill, like how long had she been in the town? Where did she work? Who knew of who first, kind of thing. But that is all I have got on this story, Stu. This is the complete timeline of the mysterious case of Cherita Thomas.
Oh my God. And Jimmy's still alive?
I believe so. I did not see that he died, but he was exonerated. I forget which year it was. It must have been 2014 when he was exonerated.
Yeah.
They talk about this exoneration in law schools to this day because it is pretty
Really?
astounding, the roundabout way that this story came to not closure, but just its ultimate outcome.
Yeah. God, I cannot remember the last time we covered a case where there were that many like paths that you went down that resulted in nothing.
Truly,
Like throwing
like,
the scent off.
constant
What a
twists.
wacko thing. Yeah. Oh my God.
The
Well, I
false
hope it
lead.
does. Yeah. I hope it does see a solve. I wish there was more information about her. Like you were saying, the backstory, just to give us any idea who could have wanted her dead. But I mean, to me, Jimmy felt like such a just shoo-in.
Well, what's interesting is that the FBI still believes that this was racially motivated, which again builds up the case around Jimmy, like in the background of this. But in either or, I guess if it was racially motivated, it was either opportunistic in the sense of somebody who just kind of saw her that night at one of the places she was, which again, I mean, we could lean further into the tavern because don't forget, she was at the receiving end of racism at the tavern as well from people who quite literally said, get out and don't come back. So who's to say there couldn't be 5 different Jimmys, 10 different Jimmys in this town?
Sure.
Jimmy just happened to be the guy who was seen being directly racist to her and who also drove the blue truck.
The blue, yeah.
But maybe the blue truck had absolutely nothing to do with Cherita's actual abduction and murder.
After you just said the theory about him, well, if it was Jimmy or whoever, drunk driving and kind of getting annoyed with her car being there, that just hit me in my gut because that feels like the extra layer to me to go after her, like after spotting the car, because that was where I was having trouble. Is like, why or how after that second tavern would he have made the connection to like go after her? But that makes perfect sense. Like if you see her on the side of the road and these guys are helping her and you're like, oh, there's that girl again. Don't help her. Like,
well, especially since it's teenagers outside of the car too. So he thinks it's like a bunch of like teens who are just like pulling something and like being annoying on the road. But also he's a combative, violent alcoholic.
Yeah.
Quite literally. And yeah, it totally tracks for me, like saying it out loud, that it could have been completely unrelated to Cherita, that actual drive-by. And it was only after the fact that like they were on the same street. He's like, that's the same damn car I just saw. The same brown sedan from a few miles back. And now it's on my street. Who is this person?
That is so weird. Well, regardless, even if he didn't do this, I hope he is in a better place now. And the Jimmy guy, or is behind bars for other things it sounds like he might have done.
No, I mean, he had served some time, but a lot of the time that he had served was like in like awaiting his trial. So by the time he got to trial, they were like, you've already served the time. I think he ended up serving like maybe a year or two at most. But I really do wonder a lot about Cherita's family because there is no real history that I read about from, what her family life was like before or even after. Like I didn't read anything about what William, her fiance, had gone through after the disappearance, what Patricia's life was like, or even what Cherita's daughter was like. I couldn't even find her name online, but I do wonder if they still think about this case and think about the mystery of what really happened to her. And whatever this new evidence is, I know it takes a while, but 10 years is quite a while. I think somebody should move and do something.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly hope that more movement is made on this case because it just feels very unfair for it to be forgotten, especially given all of the just wacko behavior that surrounded it.
I know. I feel bad for Detective Allen too, who truly like climbed the ranks hoping to like tackle this case, and he was just hit with like bull after bull between like Jimmy's changing story, the FBI being like, we're not interested anymore, and then this Sandra hack coming in and ruining literally every like actual fraud hackery, ruining everything for the sake of like fame for her and the dog. It's just welcome to Monday CreepTime, baby.
It's too much, baby.
When was the last time we recorded an episode on a Monday? I'm like, I am drained.
I know. On a Monday, it's somehow now, just like I've been engulfed in light. I'm now like 85 degrees, like beads of sweat coming down my back.
You look beautiful, though. You look very 70s. I think it's the backdrop and also like the curtain bang. It's like you look very 70s.
Oh my God. Well, I know. I'm like, if you just pull your hair up a little bit, we could have the same thing.
My hair, I know. Hold on. Wait. I'll do a little of this.
A little bit of, there we go.
This little like heart shape.
Oh my God. That could be your new look, baby.
You know what? I'm looking to try something fresh. All right. Well, babies, we want to thank you for listening to this episode of Creep Time. This has been, I'm really happy that we covered this case. I cannot express that enough. I don't know if this will make a dent in anything, but again, sort of like we were just talking about, 10 years is a long time to be sitting on new and groundbreaking evidence that was so compelling it could exonerate somebody but can't implicate another. Make it make sense.
Mm-hmm.
But that is all I have got for now. Again, thank you to everybody who has listened. We want you guys to make sure that you sign up for the Creep Time giveaway, which we'll be announcing next week. So make sure to go to creeptime.com/giveaways. But for now, babies, we are going to say goodbye.
And good luck.
And good luck, honey. Bye, creepers. We'll see you next week.
Bye, creepers.